welcome everybody to our panel discussion, and I'm happy to see so many joyful faces among us. Hopefully it will stay that way. And also I'm glad quite many people in the museum still listening to us, and I hope a very active participation and a lot of thoughts and questions from you as well. So it's not more like only us on the stage, but we are like everybody here on the stage. But Kadri, please.
And also, even though we've had some technical issues, we're very sorry about that, but if there are still people with us on Zoom, you can ask also questions, write them down, and Riin is in the audience following, and if you have questions and you write them, Riin can present them here. And we thought we would perhaps begin with more broader questions and ideas, and then go towards more precise, maybe technological questions even. So if we think of a long perspective, heritage buildings have seen renovation waves or modernization waves come and go. And do you think this one at the moment is very different in some ways? And does that mean that the heritage buildings should be engaged more than before? Or we should look at it again as modern times coming and going, but heritage buildings staying true themselves?
For me, I think it's the latter. That my feeling is that people in the UK, at least, have seen too many disasters. And a lot of the reason they don't want to take up things like wall insulation is because they have very finely tuned critical faculties that say, I don't trust this, and I've seen it fail. So I think it's giving them something else positive that they can do. Because it would be good to get a fashion that went in one good direction instead of just cycles.
I think in Sweden, especially the young people are really terrified by climate change, and they are very much eager and to take responsibility for that. So, and I think we know also Greta Thunberg from Sweden, who's actually requesting all young people and the older ones to take the responsibility. And I think that I think it's a big issue in Sweden. I don't think this is just a temporary thing. I think it's a lasting understanding of what's going to happen.
In Finland, we are getting a new building act next year, and because of our government, the new act will have it will give opportunities to demolish also listed buildings, and we are really worried about that. So the situation doesn't look so good. Sorry.
I think in Estonia the situation is not something like before in history, because of the energy prices what haven't been such a high, and also we have, or at least some of us have money to do large renovation works. I think we haven't had that money before, and therefore we can expect big changes in historic buildings also if we don't avoid them somehow. Both, I think, either of these.
Yeah. Is it just to do with property prices here? Everywhere, I mean.
Which prices?
Well, we've changed the way we view property over the last, it's been coming longer than that, but say over the last 20, 30 years, it's become the cash cow. So a home isn't a home anymore, it's a piece of landed real estate. And the trouble with that is that since it's the value of the land, not the building, that risks demolition.
Yeah, I think that's always a threat everywhere in the world. But I was thinking relating to the governmental rules or regulations. We are waiting one next year, but we haven't got any idea what that will continue, what content that will have. But we don't have a very climate conscious government at the moment. I think the population is more climate conscious than the government.
I think, again, that's true everywhere. We're expecting, they're looking at the EPCs, so the calculations, which we all know are entirely wrong and based on fictive science, whether we can get some real science in there or whether it's just each time saying, oh, well, it's not very good, but we'll have to work with it. I'm actually a bit sick of saying that after 30 years. I really think it's got us nowhere. Not in terms of, not just in historic buildings, I mean in the environment, in doing the things that we need to do. We have to be a bit bolder, I think, and say, actually, we have the solution, so just back out of the space.
And this is what all engineers are being taught at the moment, to account with EPCs.
Actually, this is a good place to continue this question about education and the way we perceive our future in this heritage, architectural heritage world, which is actually a quite, a niche in a broader perspective, actually. At least this is what is seen as a niche for people who are usually trained as construction engineers. For them, this is more like a technical question, not a cultural question. So they see this cultural heritage more like a small niche. This is, and the questions that raised today now about natural ventilation, about other ways of preserving energy, alternative ways, historic building techniques and so on, they are not very, how to say, popular themes at technical universities. I think it's not only in Estonian case, but probably also in Europe, in other technical universities as well. Do you think this is a concern? Is this a possibility? Or is this, if this is a concern, what could be done or should be done?
I think there are two different things here. The heritage issue is one, and climate issue is another. Concerning climate issue, I think it's a big issue at technical universities. It depends on also, at architectural school, if you look at the doctoral thesis, you look at the master thesis, many of them are related to the climate issue. And at the same with engineering, at least lower level of engineering, like bachelor's thesis. So I would say there you have climate consciousness, but perhaps not. And some of them are also interested in heritage.
I think it's the biggest question of all, because that's where the future comes from. And it would be nice to not have understanding existing buildings as being the icing on the cake after you've done everything else and only if you could be bothered, but rather have it as the foundation of everything, because that's what tells us, if the building stands up, that tells us it stands up better than any calculation. And I think we need, again, to be fighting our corner on that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll also try to comment on this. Well, I'm not from education establishment, but I'm thinking about education of architect, and there is education which is given by school. then there is ongoing education, and there is nothing wrong with that. If let's say you get through education basic knowledge on how buildings work and what you should pay attention to, and after that you can go to some courses or so and get this like special or so knowledge on let's say on heritage conservation or natural building issues or so on. That's how it at least like right now how it goes in Latvia, and because yeah, of course it would be let's say if I look back at my experience. Maybe that would be better if I got something like this at school, let's say as a third or fourth year, but it went okay. Yeah. So it's just basically it's interest, and what gained my interest, why I started with restoration was praxis, which I simply happened to be in historic buildings and need to solve these questions, which need to solve these issues which raised all those questions. And so it's basically a question of interest, I think.
I think in engineering courses, what I have learned, most of the courses teach you how to build new buildings. The share of the courses which deal with renovation and old buildings is quite small, or at least it was 10 years ago. I hope that it has been improved during that time, that there are more courses which teach the renovation topics.
Do you think that part of the problem is, in the past, people built the buildings that they lived in, or they saw them being built, and often the children were involved in that? You know, if you're making an earth building, the children get in there and they eat a lot of the earth before it goes on the walls. And is it that we're so, as people in the global north, whatever that means, but we're so divorced from the way buildings are constructed, which means that it's bad for maintenance too, because we don't know what to do?
That's bad.
For maintenance as well, because we don't know where to start.
This reminded me that when I started working in the heritage field and with building, I felt betrayed by the educational system because I had no idea how our buildings built. Because I think when we talk about empowering also the citizens, they need to know what's going on, what's happening, and it's like with all the not only buildings, but all of the things that we own. If it's broken, do we just replace it? You know, this mentality and this opportunity also. But to change that, we need to understand what it is, what is wrong with it, and can we change it? So it's not only let's not only look towards the engineers and architects to improve their education, but maybe more generally from the little, really. But it's something to do with the whole industrialization of the world.
And on your question about this, like self-doing, do it yourself building, I would say that was your question. Yeah, there are buildings and buildings. There are small buildings which you build for yourself or for like your family, and buildings are like 5-story rent houses, which are, let's say, whole Tallinn and whole Riga, whole cities are full of that. And we were just discussing regarding this do-it-yourself renovation for those buildings. It's okay, let's say in Riga, in Latvia, there's a school league, a small town where they teach, probably you know, they teach people how to renovate their own windows, and it's perfect. It works perfect at that scale. But can you imagine, let's say, for 5-story or 6-story rent house, turn of century rent house, the same attitude. It's totally different, like scale and totally different approach. And there should be some other, let's say, way to express your or let's say learn by doing. Yeah. So it's not so simply. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's very much a question about urban or rural attitude. Yes, because in the countryside, people used to build their own houses, and they're maintaining them all, still do that. So it's really an urban issue. This being a bit alienated from this maintenance. Yeah,
that's the word, alienation.
how to get them back, yeah, it's a good issue, of course. How to get yeah, allow the heritage and land how to renovate their own entrance doors, for example.
I don't know how in Latvia or Sweden, but in Estonia, for example, a lot of people who live in towns, most of them, or a very big part of them at least, have some relatives or their summer houses in countryside. So a lot of people in Estonia are like living both in cities and in also have houses in the countryside. Maybe they are old country houses, maybe they have it from Soviet times, this kind of vacation houses. So people actually have, a lot of people have in their families an experience of building themselves. This is like this self-building tradition is actually quite strong in Estonia. Now the question is, how do we direct this, just not to become too overly to make them think twice before insulating or changing windows, or to see this house as a one whole, not just to make these things that they think they have seen that the neighbor has done, for example.
Good parallel story. It's well, this urbanization and urban gardens. Yeah. So most of people buy tomatoes and salad in supermarkets. So, but in Riga there still is a project which is called Gardens of Sport Palace. So in the center of Riga was Sports Palace, which was demolished some 15 years ago. And there was urban gardening, so there was like movement for people who want to, who don't have those country homes, but they can in small like plots like grow their own grass and not grass but tomatoes and what do they need for and it was very popular actually, and maybe it's the same parallel story we can bring back to restoration and somehow encourage people to do themselves some things and. At small scale and not in big, but just to get them interested in.
Maybe you need to do another game, a sort of construction one.
Often Estonians, especially these rural homeowners, ask why we have so much regulations and why we need so much documentation about renovation and building works, because they think that they know how to do and why this extra work. But actually, I think it is needed to avoid different mistakes they have made, their parents have made, to direct this flow, or how to say.
In Sweden, I think up to 1940s, 50s, people were really building their own houses. But after that, the building industry or the house industry was developed, and the lower middle class were able to buy ready-made houses and factory-made produced houses. And that's when also this knowledge of how to build kind of disappeared. In the 30s and 20s, 30s and early 40s, we had a lot of self houses that was built together with the owners, and also in the urban areas. But talking about countryside, I think still it's a little bit of Wild West in Sweden, in the countryside. And I was talking with one city architect in a small town in central Sweden the other day, and asked them if they have checked their if they do check their city plan by aerial photographs to see that people are not building illegally. And he said, no, we wouldn't do that. We cannot do that because it will get too many problems. So yes. So we have people are really building what they think they want to or need in the countryside today.
And one thing we haven't maybe talked about is the relationship between the protection of cultural heritage and the protection of the environment, because we want to talk about them together here, but often we can see that maybe they would offer controversial opportunities. I started thinking when Arthur showed a picture of a modern building that was made of concrete and they wanted to demolish it but didn't because you can't recycle, you can't reuse the concrete. So maybe if we would strictly look from the environmental point of view, it would feel like we could take apart the historical log buildings and brick buildings because we can reuse the materials, but instead, from the environmental point of view, maybe we should be focused on renovating and keeping in use the modern buildings, which can't be recycled. Have you thought about this kind of conflict?
You've just given me something else to lie awake at night worrying about. That's one to head off at the pass, isn't it? But you're right. If that...
Park Hill, Sheffield.
Oh, Park Hill, yes. But that was, in all those big things, what comes in is a lot of politics. And, you know, how much of this are we pushing against some very vested interests? You know, we're in a bad state in that, as Ulrika was saying too. There are a lot of people making money out of the way it is at the moment, even though we can see that's not good for the long term. So how do we get our messages out further? Not just, because here we're still preaching to the choir.
I think you can do a lot with the modernism or even the very dull, like the Park Hill. That was even a listed project in UK, in Sheffield. And but then they allowed it to be completely modernized. I mean, so it's a fantastic modern project now. Of course, completely gentrified. So the question is, how do you want to change these things? Do you want to do it in a gentrifying manner, or do you want to do it in a social, to keep the social place intact? Mm-hmm. So this is actually one of the questions.
Yes, I think the whole thing of how the built environment supports society or doesn't is critical. That's one of the things that I find most wonderful when my Global South colleagues talk, because for them it's all one thing. And I bet you find that in some of the, Laponia and so.
Kalamaya, how is that? Yeah. How has Kalamaya changed here in
Well, yes, gentrification is the word for it, because it's a wooden building area that they were thought of at some point to just bulldoze it all to build new buildings. But then, luckily, people realized that there's something to it, to these areas that we want to keep. That we don't only want to live in this warm, modern boxes of apartment, but the environment, the streets, the life, the nature, the historical structures, and the locations also important. And maybe that also comes to the question of what we briefly touched today is, what is the heritage? Which are the buildings that we should maintain? Is it only a question of the authorities to decide, or could it be left to the people to decide if this is historic and meaningful for me? And should I be allowed to not renovate it completely because of the... Yes, yes. So is it also a question in other countries that what is actually the heritage buildings? What is heritage? What needs to be preserved? Is it the material that needs to be preserved, or also the function? And so maybe you can tell a bit about discussions in your country about that.
Yes, it's hugely central to all the discussions in the UK and in Australia and so as well. I'm not sure about America. That I think it hasn't quite got there yet. But in historic England, we found that the most useful form of protection was the conservation area, because that was about what local people liked, and it was about how everything worked. So that was always really popular. And you don't get people pushing against that in the way they'll push against listing. And, well, there's another point, but I'll pass it on.
I would like to comment something Katri said earlier about what kind of buildings should be maintained. You were talking about maintaining the buildings that aren't recyclable, but those buildings, to my mind, are also the kind of buildings that will be quite short-lived, even if you try to maintain them, at least in Finland, because the structures have come so multi-layered, so complicated. It's practically impossible to repair them, and something will inevitably happen to all structures. So I can't really think that's an option to sort of focus on the bad ones.
Because this sample which I showed, it was not actually like regular regular apartment building. It was for former communist party, like a sample building. So it had a really strong structure inside. It was not just panel building. You know, it's just understand what we're talking about.
I am a bit would like to go against that, because I think it's very easy that we have these modernist buildings from the 60s and 70s that really have a bad reputation, like the Park Hill had, Barbican had, and now they're restored and they're so popular in UK, and also the Le Corbusier building in Marseille, beautifully restored. And we have in Sweden some areas also very well restored and changed and become very nice housing projects. And of course, it depends on how much input you put into them. And very often these areas are even worsened because they are given to immigrants to live in. No maintenance is being done, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. So it's also the architecture from the postmodernism from the 1980s that I personally dislike. Really, it's really now in fashion in Sweden, and they are doing so many programs about that. So it's we think something now. Our next generation will have some other ideas. It's very, very difficult to be very sure about to remove something that's being built.
Yes, thinking of how that relates back to the social thing, because it does. One of the reasons that Historic England got a big grant from government was because someone in government did the research and discovered that they were worried about the death of townships, especially in the north of England, and they discovered that the one thing that was a marker for people having pride and coming back was the historic built environment. And then they sort of said, oh, maybe we should give you some money. Not much, but...
Actually, Ular, who was coordinating the first half of the day, he actually came recently from Ukraine and told me about his experience, or actually the experience of local people whose towns are now all obliterated. And actually there he realized how important it is the historic built environment to the identity of people. So this is something Europeans haven't come across in like 80 years. This question actually haven't thought of that really, but this is really important for us, and also in the case of renovation, you could say, to remain this sense of identity of the building, to have its own specific characteristics remains, and there is a danger of renovation, and in case that it's considers the buildings that are not under protection, that these kind of lose their character in the process. process.
Yes, I agree. And I think Ulrika mentioned that about the Swedish regulation, that every building is obliged to be carefully treated in our law.
That applies also to Finland.
I'm feeling a bit envious, but it's also, we can turn that on its head and say, is that the reason for a lot of society breakdown is because we've lost something about how these things work.
Well, if you come back from what we lost and how we can gain, then and actually coming back to the topic, maybe we discussed in the previous breaks that most of the projects which are, they end up with nothing. They end up with just files. Let's say those projects of where you're doing research. Also, this guy which was from Finland, or who talked about history and future, yeah, together. He was going to research once more Windows. That was again what they have been researched for so many times, and then what they expect to find new. But still, it's known that if you replace the glass, you can get so and so watts per Kelvin or per square meter, and then if you put shutters, you get. So it has been researched several times, but it somehow hasn't been put into public. You know, so it's this aftermath or after actually marketing of those ideas. You know, that renovation is trendy. Renovation can do good things. I think that should be the roadmap to the future. And even if you look here at the Architecture Museum, how many of those buildings are promoting renovation? They're promoting preservation. Okay, there are historic buildings. There are a few like Rotterdam and so, which is for renovation. But it's also it's like trendy, shapy architecture. But it's not about what we're talking. So everyone who's sitting here in this room understands each other. But we cannot obviously learn to talk to people around behind the wall. Yeah, and that's probably how we should concentrate on this, on sharing our ideas and talking much more with people and doing some visualizations of this and doing marketing of those.
And to me, the most important thing about what you just said is that we expect buildings to save energy and save the world instead of expecting people to save energy.
Communication is definitely an important factor here. I was wondering if you should sponsor some famous TikTokers to put up drapery to popularize them, but to now maybe discuss a bit about the more technical solutions. We've heard also before you talking about the natural ventilation, and it's something we really want to encourage also in the historical buildings in Estonia. But if this kind of encouragement comes from the heritage experts, not engineers, we need very good research to show engineers. So is there maybe something you can refer us to? One, what's the positive of the natural ventilation, but also is there maybe research that you know of done about the mechanical ventilation that would show that it's actually not working as effectively as commercialized?
That kind of researches are never published because the people who pay for them don't like the results. Yes. So the kind of things that are published, they are like, there is one research by Tampere Technical University showing it's from 2005, and it's showing that at the time of the new buildings, like one-family houses, the ones that were using natural ventilation were more efficient than the ones using mechanical ventilation. And it didn't depend on whether the house had heat recovery or not. Natural ventilation was the most energy efficient anyway. And the result of the research was actually that the use of the building is the most important thing. And then there is other research from maybe 2011 or 12. And that deals with ventilation in office buildings, and they were comparing 2 liters per second per person to 28 liters per second per person, and they kept the temperature of the office the same all the time, and they were expecting that people with a low ventilation rate would feel unhappy or succeed badly in what they were doing, and the result was that there was practically no difference at all, except people found the low ventilation rate more comfortable.
Ulla, do you think there's reason and potential to encourage natural ventilation in historical buildings in Estonia more than until now?
I think there is a way, but currently we don't have the knowledge about correctly working natural ventilation. I think we can learn from Finnish guidebooks, because the ventilation which owners described as natural is often no ventilation, because it works only when window is open, and otherwise it doesn't work. There is no other opening.
That has been a problem in Finland as well. So we had to define that natural ventilation is the kind of system where you have both supply and exhaust air.
But Kadri, if you asked about studies, then these studies made 10 to 15 years ago in Estonia about different types of apartment buildings. Then the air change rate and CO2 concentrations were measured, and one of the outcomes were that the cheap, simple ventilation system doesn't improve over the previous condition. So you should do complete system or do nothing, because the partly done system doesn't improve anything.
If we're talking about CO2 emissions that we have to declare now, if you start calculating, now it's not in housing as the same amount as in office buildings, but if you start counting the emissions from ventilation system, you really get very high values. And I don't think how you can justify that when you are supposed to reduce your emissions.
I don't know if you talked about energy CO2 emission or CO2 level in room caused by people.
I'm talking about the production of all these ventilation channels and the aggregate and so on. The production cost is for the environment is very high.
I can't argue with that.
I was, a few weeks ago, I was at a building pathology conference in England. That was the first one that had been run for quite some years, so everyone was there. And it was quite extraordinary to hear this room of 200 experts in this from all over the place, all saying something I'd not heard said so categorically before, which was that they'd all been doing it for many decades and they didn't see mold problems and so until we started sealing up the buildings and super insulating them. This is a problem that's been created and we have to find our way around it. And natural ventilation, when you look at those pictures that are clearly in winter and they've got the windows wide open, always in the medieval images, that's telling us something about what was needed to keep a building healthy.
Are there maybe questions from the audience here or from online? Yes, I think we don't have any more mics, so I will take this one.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have any education in Finland about the natural ventilation? But where are you? Okay.
As far as I know, natural ventilation is not taught to engineers. The only thing that is told them about it is that it doesn't work. And that's why we have just maybe I know maybe 10 engineers that can work with natural ventilation. So it's not really a good situation. I'm hoping that the book we wrote with my colleague and an engineer will be improving things.
Anyone else?
Regarding the ventilation is also another theme that we haven't touched, and this is actually the role of different players in this renovation, maybe. One of them, what strikes to me is quite important, is the building industry, meaning the manufacturers of building materials, but also big industrial, you could say industrial building companies as well. And so it's quite emblematic that now there are people in this room sitting, mostly architects, historians, but not very many people from building industry, because they have different conferences. And in these conferences, they talk about from a different viewpoint of the renovation. And actually, I've been to one of these recently, and then there are quite strong views on how to renovate. And this is to make it more effective, make it more whole, in the sense that the whole house should be renovated from top to bottom, from inside to outside, and to use more pre-made details. So this is one of the questions: how this our say heritage architecture fit in this new canon of industry.
Well, it doesn't, of course, because the industry is interested in selling products. And if the houses are built once and then they last for 500 years, there is no place for industry there. So that's, of course, why they prefer like very complicated structures that need to be built maybe now in every 30 years.
And I would, if I will be kind to the entrepreneurs, I would say that we can, in one way, understand them, because they don't want to get complaints. They don't want to redo things. That's why they do what they always did and what they know. What we have to focus on is not the entrepreneurs, it's the clients. I think the knowledge of the clients, that's the one who tells the entrepreneurs what they want. That's the one ordering the clients for the job to be done. And I think focusing on clients, politicians, we cannot change clients' greed or I mean, also that you know, you can understand that they don't want to get complaints, they don't want to redo and so on. But the client can have the only one to have an impact actually by knowledge.
That's why I also wanted to agree with you that if you look back 100 years, let's say Art Nouveau buildings in historic centers, there were very many details, and that was not because entrepreneurs wanted to make them, but because people asked them. They asked for craftsmen, and it was just normal as a life to make buildings like that. And if you manage to make that kind of thinking and understanding as normal thing, you know, then it would just come into usage. And yeah, I have had clients who asks who know everything about building and they let's say about simple building, and they know what they want, and yeah, it's so it means that it is this role somehow, this idea somewhere, it is somewhere.
But there is an evil empire, I'm sorry, Darth Vader appearing this morning, selling insulation, and so they really are after market share. And they do have the government ear, because governments equate market share with wealth creation. that's another paradigm that cannot stand, because the impossible hamster that keeps growing, it just cannot keep going. But it is at the moment, and they have that ear of government, if it fails, you sell them the new one. So we need to, because still someone has to choose to buy it, it is back to the owners, managers of the property, I think.
And I agree a lot that it's the property owner who really then shapes the market. But do you have any suggestions how to work on the property owners, their knowledge, their what they choose? How can we affect that?
This is the key, isn't it? I like your things. You're doing it. Yeah. I think it's grassroots. Yeah, in my experience, having done it tried to get every level, I do think it is grassroots, and you can, once you do say these things to people, it's such common sense that everyone goes, common sense came up a few times, that wonderful talk from Norway about the common sense that had been forgotten because it was common sense. I think one of our missions must surely be to collate as much as possible all the common sense and put it out there for people, because then people go, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I've seen that. That makes sense. And then you start, I think that's the way you have to start changing the world, because hopefully they tell someone else, and you get this exponential growth of understanding. It's worth a go.
But at the same time, it's not. It's not that so straightforward. I'm like in the National Property Board in Sweden that owns and maintains all the listed state-listed buildings, and has a huge ownership. They are really serious clients, and they are quite knowledgeable, and I think they are absolutely very, very good. They are positive to energy glass, to recycling. Now we're going to test to see how we can implement solar cells on listed buildings. But at the same time, then there's one lapsus, as that's the ventilation issue. So I mean, it's sometimes it's like not. Sometimes, let's say 80% is positive, and then there's 20% that goes back.
And the 20% can cause huge damage to the whole building. Absolutely. and the people in it.
Yeah, absolutely, but it's not easy.
Yes, and we are just in inside group here, I think, and one extremely important task for us is to reach out and to really, because people are interested. And I saw some very, very good news the other day from Sweden, that the municipality, some kind of housing company, they wanted to change all the kitchens in one building. And 80% of the guests or the inhabitants said, no, we don't want that. We want our old kitchens, and you can just paint them or restore them. So I think there's a great potential, but we really also need to take on that task to really reach out. And how we do it, that would be very interesting to discuss, because people are willing to, because it's usually also the cheaper solutions.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I think owners prefer clear visual change, so it is easier to sell them something new or some larger works. It is much harder to sell them maintenance works where the visual change is minimal or almost none, and it is just human nature.
I think this is the role of people who own the houses. Is you cannot overstress this, of course. You are right about that. On the other hand, one cannot expect a home owner who is not an architect or engineer or a builder, who is maybe I don't know, teacher or or a representative of some other occupation, and he doesn't have or she doesn't have time or energy to deal with these questions. And now I'll come to the question what concerns particularly 4 people out of this group. What is the role of architect in this question?
Well, of course, we try to enlighten all our clients about these matters, but to be honest, I must say that nowadays we try to get the kind of clients that are already enlightened, so that they already want to have solid structures and wooden windows and natural ventilation and a fireplace to make sure that the house will stand even if there is a whatever crisis.
Well, I guess I partly tried to understand, to answer already this question, but it was really a question of marketing. And 2 or 3 years ago, well, we as an office, we are doing also architectural investigation. So it's basically what it's called architectural investigation group. And at one point we understood that there's the same thing, that we 20 people which are in the office, we know what we are talking about, what is in this architectural investigation, but people around, they don't understand what the program about. And what we did, we made a small movie, and it was at the very end of COVID, and we made the movie show and explained to people, and so we reached out. Well, we made several times this, and we reached out some 100 people or so, 200 people. So, and right now I think that well, I can feel that they understand what there are much more people which understand what we're talking about. And I guess the same is about the things which are right now. Okay, conference is very good, Facebook translation is very good. Let's go out and reach people, and that's the only way how to go on with this. Yeah.
Well, I agree with Julia. It's much easier if you have a client that understands you and has the same ideology. And sometimes it can be very problematic, because if it's a private house and you have a couple, and the one understands you but the other doesn't, then it's. I
was wondering about that. I'm not an architect. I understand that.
You may have opinion.
My opinion was I went off and did physics. I think in my experience, people get architecture more when they speak to conservation architects, when they speak to people working in this field. Then they start to get interested and get it. They don't really get the Bezier curves on screens. Huh?
I think the only one thing when you can persuade somebody is because everybody wants the project to be as cheap as possible. If you can convince that this would be much cheaper, that's perhaps a possibility. But if you have a lot of money, then that can ruin a building.
Yeah. The way to get the worst building in the world is to give the architect a blank check.
From the engineer perspective of view, then we have to educate owners, because they have to understand the condition of their houses, because otherwise building companies will cheat them. I mean that they say that this wall needs to be replaced, but the owner has no idea if it is true or false, if it can be renovated or not.
I'm wondering that in the context where it's really a renovation wave, so a lot is going on, and you just said it's something that's not a passing thing, but we need to climate-proof the buildings, we need to modernize the living spaces, so it will be like a culture of renovation, and we will add a layer somehow to our heritage. So even though it's very good to have international cooperation and share the solutions, do you think it's something that each country should maybe decide on themselves? What is our renovation culture? Maybe taking on these solutions from different countries, can it maybe be not true to these buildings themselves?
Well, it might be a place to start, but I think the most important thing is that we keep sharing information, because one of the things, my dear friend and colleague Bill Bordas always says that we lost our feedback loops. So a lot of the reason we do things badly is because you don't ever get that fed back into the system. Even when you've got a developer, they run away. When that building doesn't work, the lawyers take care of it. And there's something here about trying things, and perhaps not all trying the same things, but trying local approaches and then sharing what really worked that may or may not be as local as all that.
Yes, but I've been working in Bosnia and looking around, I can see that very many solutions are very same from medieval time. So even during medieval time, builders used to go to places where they found work. So it's much of what you think is local is not as local as you would believe. But then there are always also local solutions, which are due to the material you use. The really type of wood, or the type of plaster, or the type of, and those that knowledge is very local, and you have to respect that, because it's also in tune with the climate you are living in.
Oh, I've just thought that this relates back to education again. This is back to the, yes, but it's back to the old masters and apprentice ways of learning things, which were stellar. They obviously developed over centuries to be really good. So you had 7 years where you learnt your tradition. And, the first year you thought, it's 7 years. It won't take me 7 years. I'll do it by the end of the year. And then by the end of 7 years, you're really nervous. But they send you off, and you have to go somewhere else with a different tradition for 7 years as a journeyman. I think that's got a lot of truth in it, about how you then transfer ideas. You take in ideas that you've learnt, you see whether they work there or not, and you learn new ideas, and out of that becomes a greater whole. So how do we get apprentices back?
Yeah, the times have passed, and people are no longer traveling on master's journey, on this apprentice journey, and you mentioned this TikTok stuff, but it's actually how people learn things, and the question is much more about involvement. If you want to be involved into the process, if you are interested into this. A short story. There is ghetto games in Riga. It's for young people, for grown-ups who are involved into playing basketball, and it's like a youth moment. And the guy who organizes this, he told that at some point he made, there was some financing from outside, and they made some gate and so for this area, and it was very quickly broken because the kids just simply went and broke it. And the next approach was to involve them into painting and into doing this, and then nothing was broken. So it means that this attitude, if you do something yourself, you're much more involved into this, and you value it much more. And maybe that should be the approach, how to also deal with heritage and with preservation and development of heritage.
Other questions in the audience in the meantime?
Thank you. I'll use this opportunity to ask a question regarding the change of experience. As you mentioned, the Building Act in Finland and in Sweden, you have it written down that the buildings that are not listed or protected in any way, they still have to be built or retrofit as they would remain their characteristics or such things. Does it work in practice also? Because In Estonia, we are also discussing how to deal with the buildings that are not under protection regarding the building directive of performance. So I would like to hear how does it work there.
I think it depends very much where the building stands first. If it's in an urban area, that would be much more control. If it's in the countryside, no way. You can do whatever you want almost. And also there's a big political pressure from the government we have now to loosen the building codes, these requirements. But I would say that in urban areas it's rather controlled, yes.
Does it then come from the ability of the municipality?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I would like to add to that, because the Building Act, that's the law for the municipalities. It's not the state that controls that. It's the municipalities who gives the permissions. And it's very different depending on the attitude within the politics and the people working, because smaller like applications are mainly, I mean, it's the people working with them, deciding them mainly. Whereas bigger projects could be a prestige project, and I don't even think that the politicians know about this, that they have to be careful about the values of each building. So I would say it varies very, very much. And it's not only in the countryside, it's absolutely also in the cityscapes.
Yeah, but in Stockholm it's really restricted.
Yeah, but Stockholm is one part, but the rest of the country.
And it's too, perhaps sometimes we could also think that it's too restricted. But this, because to what is being careful, that's also a definition. Yes. So if we have a building that's completely ordinary and you want to do something that would kind of put an extra year ring on it and do something, as an architect you might want to do something more special. And then it's really, really difficult to get that through in Stockholm.
I was on the planning body for cathedrals, and it was actually easier to do major changes to a 11th century cathedral than to one from the 1960s or so. It's the buildings that are really get protected are the ones, the architect designed buildings where the acolytes are still alive, where you cannot, they put cheap wiring in because that's all they could afford, but you've got to now preserve the wiring because it's sacred. And yeah, this does us no favors.
I just wanted to add a comment from this wonderful working group of ICOMOS, Europe Group, and ISCES, the scientific committee, because we are collecting data from different countries, and there is some hope, let's say, coming from Ireland, where they have defined these houses of historical merit as traditional houses, and this is a very broad concept. And they are using the building passports where they can add also the regulations for the appearance and functioning of the house in technical sense. And the other example comes from Germany, which you know is a very complicated country in many ways. But our dear colleague from Germany said that actually they have this possibility that they are using the certificates from the municipality to prove that the house has architectural merit. You can apply for this certificate, and with this certificate you can go to the mitigations for conditions foreseen by this building performance directive. So these are the two examples that came to my mind immediately, but there are probably more coming.
Yes, I was about to say about Finnish legislation that in our Building Act, the first paragraph says that all building must be sustainable, and nearly nothing is sustainable. And nobody even remembers that there is such a paragraph. And this other thing, it's maybe number 181, saying that you're not supposed to destroy any buildings with values. And that's that's useful if you're an architect and there are officials wanting you to do something to damage the building. Then you can say, hey, we can't do this because of this. But nobody's taking care that buildings are not destroyed, really.
So we've come to the question of what is valuable architecture. But I would like to dwell on a question that is related to this. Some way, it's a question of typologies and the question of replicable, not replicas, but standard solutions for the conservation of buildings. We have today Philip from Denmark told us about this project, where European project, where one of the goals is to work out these kind of standard solutions, and is actually one of the goals of this heritage home project for Estonia as well. Still, the question remains how applicable or how good this way of dividing, monuments into types and making standard solutions is or is not?
Well, I think it's not. I think the big thing that strikes me comparing that project to this project is people. There was at no point when it might come in, Bill Bordas is on their steering committee, he'll try and get it in there, but at no point did they talk about the people, the uses of the building, and there are often, any building will have more than one use. Part of the standardization problem is that buildings have many uses, and they are what is driving this. As Julia said, it's people who use the energy. We really need to put people back at the center of what we're doing and say, you have a unique building in the way you are and the way you want to live in it. And that certainly gets through to people, I think. Don't you?
Yeah, we're hoping so, yeah.
There is an exception for what you just said, and it's these very new, totally automized buildings, because the inhabitants, they can't do anything, because the automation takes care of everything and makes sure that energy is used constantly.
Which means they're all miserable, but who cares? Yeah, I mean, it comes down to whether the people can do what they need to do in the building. We were talking this morning over a coffee of how lovely it was to be in a hotel where you could open the windows. I have yet to meet the person who wants to be in a hotel room where they can't open the windows, but this is the standard. People are being left out of this equation in a big way.
I said we can wait till they have proven it to be good.
Yes, that'll be hard.
Well, regarding those standard solutions, I was just listening. Of course, there are different functions and different building styles, but styles or construction ways. But there are some illnesses to the building. Let's say the same raising damp, and there are not so many solutions to this. Actually, there are more or less already standardized. And I would talk not so much about solutions rather than good practices. Practices have worked for let's say similar types of buildings. And if it works on 3 or 10 or 15 buildings, why not use it on 16th building? And it's not a question about, let's say, duplicating the same solution for the whole building, but rather than for special issues. And it's like if the roof is leaking, you repair the roof. And this repair depends on the material. If it's clay tile, you use one method. If it's tin, even another method, and so on. And the same for other things.
I could comment it in this way, that in 1994, the Swedish building code was changed from being strictly forbidding different materials to be used in specific ways, till to be functionally based, that we have a rule that you have to withstand fire for 30, 40, 60 or 90 minutes, and we have to have this and this load-bearing capacity, and so on. But without mentioning any materials or how you would reach this goal, which means that all of a sudden you could use whatever solution you want, as long as you can prove that it will fulfill the requirements. Which is, to me, changing from a stupid way of having a building to an intelligent way. Because all of a sudden you can really start thinking, you can be creative, you can come up with new solutions. And we were, at the same time, there was this very big trend with making, in building with wood. And I was involved with that, and we were discussing, should we make some kind of a handbook in wood? And then we decided not to do so, because that would also make people lose their creative mind, and also to not learn how wood is being how it performs. So I mean, instead of giving information about how wood is, the performance of wood and so on, so to force people to think them on their own. And so this is always a risk when you come with solutions, that you lose, that you can misuse, you can put the solution in the wrong, you can apply it in a wrong situation. So this is a risky thing from history.
Well, I've got the exact thing, which is Grenfell Tower in London, the one that's my neighbours, that they fried 72 people in, which is why I feel a bit bolshy. But the government has now changed, because beforehand the requirements were all, you use this material and you use this material, and they could really push that. And now the requirements for fire is by performance. So it's going to change things. They've never had that in the UK before for any of their codes. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Good, I think.
But if you don't provide solutions, then I'm just thinking, how do you promote, let's say, reuse of materials? Let's say the same principle. You have wooden beams, for example, in a building, and they're rotten somewhere, someplace, and well, the usual solution would be just simply to replace them, to take out and place back new. But how teach people that you can reuse it, and you can there are methods of repair, and that's not a complex solution, but it's like approach or shift them towards thinking like that, and I think that should be done.
Give them 10 solutions, and then they will start think, which one should I use?
Maybe samples, maybe yeah. Yeah, it's a good argument.
Cheap or easiest to build? It can be sometimes different.
When there was discussion about fire requirements, then recently our rescue
Fire department.
Fire department was published material how to insulate structures from fire with natural materials, for example, clay plaster or lime plaster instead of standard gypsum boards. Therefore, I think some kind of solutions or guidelines have to be published to use them. Otherwise, old standard cheap solution goes on.
Of course, but they have to still to be fireproof and tested to get these values.
This was published based on scientific works and tests.
Well, I think the discussions could go on forever because it's such a complex issue, renovation, but it's good that we ended on talking about fire department. Once again shows it's so interdisciplinarity, the approach to cultural heritage buildings renovation. And we just need to keep finding ways to get people on board, from the homeowners, from architects, engineers, technical consultants, heritage experts also. So we work towards that. Thank you very much for all of them, everybody in the panel. Thank you everybody for thinking along, being here. And I think we'll have a few informational words about what's going to happen tomorrow